He didn't just forget my birthday. He threw it on the floor. The cake I bought, the small effort I made after years of being invisible in my own marriage, he looked at it, scoffed, and said, "Eat it yourself." Then he walked out. To spend the night with a younger coworker like I didn't matter at all. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't chase him. I cleaned the mess, packed my things, and I left that house in silence. But here's what he didn't know. For years, I wasn't just his wife. I was the one holding his entire life together, the one remembering every deadline, smoothing over every mistake, keeping his reputation intact when he didn't even realize he was falling apart. And the moment I walked away, everything he built started to crumble. A month later, the same man who humiliated me was standing in front of me again, desperate, shaken, begging me to fix the biggest mistake of his career. That's when I looked him straight in the eyes and gave him the only answer he ever taught me. Handle it yourself. But what happened next? He didn't just lose a contract. He lost everything he thought he was. And by the end of this story, you'll understand exactly why sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't what you do. It's what you finally stop doing. My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 58 years old, and for most of my life, I've been the kind of woman people describe as dependable, organized, and easy to rely on. I don't have a flashy career title, but I've spent decades quietly managing the details that keep other people's lives from falling apart. If you had met me a few months ago, you probably wouldn't have noticed anything unusual. I lived in a comfortable home, married to a man who people respected, a man who always seemed to know exactly what he was doing. From the outside, it looked like we had built something stable together. What no one saw was how much of that stability depended on things I did without ever being asked and without ever being acknowledged. I had learned that habit early. Growing up, I was the one who didn't cause trouble. My mother used to say I was the strong one, the one who could handle anything. It sounded like a compliment, but over time I realized what it really meant. It meant I was the one expected to adjust, to give in, to fix things quietly, while everyone else moved on. My brother Richard was the one they worried about, the one they celebrated, the one who was allowed to fail without consequences. I was the one who made sure nothing ever got that far. I carried that pattern into my marriage without even realizing it. Daniel never asked me to take care of everything. He didn't need to. I noticed things before they became problems. I remembered the names of his clients, the details of their families, the deadlines he mentioned once and then forgot. I organized documents, corrected small mistakes before they could grow into larger ones, and made sure that when he walked into a room, he appeared prepared and confident. Over the years, people began to admire him for that. They called him sharp, reliable, impressive. I would sit beside him, smile politely, and let them believe it was all him. There was a time early in our marriage when things almost went differently. Daniel had been working on an important presentation, one that could have cost him a major opportunity if it went wrong. I remember sitting up late at the dining table reviewing his materials while he slept, catching an inconsistency that would have been obvious to anyone paying close attention. I fixed it quietly, adjusted the numbers, and made sure everything aligned. The next day, he delivered it flawlessly. He came home proud, talking about how well it had gone. I listened, nodded, and didn't mention the hours I had spent making sure it did. Moments like that became routine, not dramatic enough to be remembered, but essential enough that without them, things would have looked very different. And yet, over time, even I started to treat them as invisible. My family never saw it either. They still called me when they needed something handled. Paperwork, a difficult conversation, a problem no one else wanted to deal with. But when it came to recognition, to acknowledgement, to even something as simple as remembering what mattered to me, I didn't seem to exist in the same way. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that being needed was enough. But something shifted the year I turned 58. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quieter than that, almost easy to miss. I realized I couldn't remember the last time anyone had asked me what I wanted, not what I could do for them, not what I could fix, but what I actually wanted for myself. The thought stayed with me longer than I expected. A few days before my birthday, I found myself standing in a small bakery I had passed 100 times without ever going in. I wasn't planning anything elaborate. I didn't need a party or a celebration. I just wanted something small, something that belonged to me. I chose a simple cake, nothing decorated in bright colors or covered in elaborate designs. Just something clean and understated. It felt appropriate. I told myself it didn't matter whether anyone else noticed. That wasn't the point this time. I brought it home and placed it carefully in the refrigerator like it was something fragile. Not because of the cake itself, but because of what it represented. For the first time in years, I had done something without thinking about how it would benefit someone else. It was a small decision, but it didn't feel small. That night, as I moved through the house, checking things out of habit, making sure everything was in order, I noticed how quiet it felt. Not empty, just quiet, in a way that made me aware of my own presence. I wasn't rushing to fix anything. I wasn't anticipating a problem. I was simply there waiting. I didn't expect anything dramatic to happen. I wasn't even sure I expected anything to change. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't preparing myself to accept whatever came without question. I was paying attention, and somewhere in that quiet I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to think before. If everything in my life had been held together by what I quietly carried, then what would happen if I ever decided to put it down? For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting to be appreciated. I was waiting to see if anything would finally change. The next morning, everything looked exactly the same, and yet it didn't feel the same anymore. I moved through the kitchen, preparing coffee, straightening things that didn't need straightening, but there was a quiet awareness in me that hadn't been there before. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something more precise, like I had finally stepped back far enough to see a pattern I had been living inside for years. Daniel came down a little later than usual, already dressed, already checking his phone. He greeted me the way he always did, a quick glance, a distracted nod, nothing unkind, nothing warm either. I handed him his coffee without being asked. It was second nature, the kind of habit you don't think about until you stop. He took it, thanked me in that automatic way. People thank someone for something they expect, and then went right back to his messages. He mentioned a meeting he had later that day, something important, something he said could open bigger doors. I listened like I always did, but this time I noticed the gaps. He spoke confidently, but he skipped over details, brushed past specifics that I knew would matter. Normally, I would have followed up, asked questions, reminded him of points he might have forgotten. I would have filled in the spaces without him even realizing they were there. That morning, I didn't. He didn't notice. That was the first thing that stayed with me. Not that he overlooked something, but that he never once considered I might be the one who usually made sure nothing was overlooked in the first place. Later that evening, we attended a small dinner with a few of his clients. It was the kind of gathering I had organized countless times before, even when someone else hosted it. I knew what conversations mattered, which details people remembered, how to guide an interaction, so it felt effortless. I slipped into that role again without thinking, making sure introductions went smoothly, remembering names, noticing when someone felt left out, and quietly bringing them back into the conversation. At one point, one of the clients turned to Daniel and complimented him on how well he handled people, how he always seemed to know exactly what to say. Daniel smiled, accepted it easily, and said, "I've been doing this long enough. You learn how things work." Everyone laughed. I smiled too, but something in that moment settled differently inside me. It wasn't just that he took the credit. It was how natural it was for him to believe it belonged to him. A little later, another guest mentioned a proposal Daniel had sent over the week before. He said it was one of the most thorough documents he'd seen in a long time, that it anticipated questions before they even came up. Daniel nodded again, thanked him, and began explaining parts of it with a confidence that sounded convincing if you didn't know better. I stood there, listening to him describe work I had quietly reviewed, line by line, adjusting phrasing, tightening arguments, making sure nothing could be misinterpreted. For a brief moment, the client glanced at me and said almost casually, "You must have had a hand in that too." It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. Daniel let out a short laugh and waved it off. "She keeps things running at home," he said. "I handle the rest." There it was, simple and clean, a division that erased everything I had done without ever needing to deny it directly. The client didn't press further. The conversation moved on. But I felt the weight of that sentence more than I expected. Not because it was new, but because I could no longer pretend I didn't hear it clearly. On the drive home, Daniel talked about how well the evening had gone, how promising the opportunity looked. I agreed, where it made sense. I didn't correct him. I didn't remind him of anything he had missed or might still need to prepare. For the first time, I let the conversation sit exactly where he left it. When we got back, he went straight to his office, still energized, still thinking ahead. I stood in the living room for a moment, looking around at the space I had maintained for years. It was comfortable, orderly, the kind of place people admired when they visited. I had built that environment quietly, piece by piece, without ever calling attention to it. My phone rang not long after. It was my mother. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't mention my birthday, which was only days away. Instead, she told me Richard needed help with something, that there were documents he didn't understand, and she thought I could take a look and fix it quickly. Her voice carried that familiar expectation, the assumption that, of course, I would say yes. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I told her I would think about it. There was a pause on the other end, a small one but noticeable. I had never said that before. Usually I agreed before she even finished asking. She didn't argue, but I could hear the confusion in her silence. After I hung up, I sat down and let the quiet settle again. It wasn't dramatic. Nothing had exploded. No one had shouted or walked out. And yet I could feel something shifting in a way that was impossible to ignore. It wasn't about one comment at dinner or one phone call. It was about seeing all at once how consistently I had been placed in the same position no matter where I stood. Daniel came out of his office later, still talking about work, still moving forward as if everything was exactly as it should be. He asked me if I could look over a few things for him the next day just to make sure everything was tight. I met his eyes and said I would see what I had time for. He nodded, satisfied with that answer, never questioning it. That was when I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to fully accept before. I wasn't being overlooked by accident. I had been carefully positioned in a role that benefited everyone else, and I had stayed there long enough that no one imagined I might step out of it. As I went upstairs that night, I passed by the refrigerator and paused for just a second. The cake was still there, untouched, waiting. I looked at it, then closed the door gently. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just invisible. I was replaceable. I stood there for a moment, longer than I needed to, my hand still resting lightly against the refrigerator door after I had closed it. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that usually felt comforting, but that night it carried something heavier. I went upstairs slowly, not because I was tired, but because I was thinking in a way I hadn't allowed myself to before. I wasn't trying to fix anything. I wasn't planning how to make things better. I was simply noticing. The day of my birthday arrived without ceremony. There were no messages waiting when I woke up, no reminders, no small gestures. I didn't feel surprised. I had spent enough years understanding how easily my presence could be overlooked. Still, there was something different this time. I wasn't making excuses for it. I wasn't telling myself it didn't matter. I let the silence sit exactly as it was. I moved through the morning calmly, taking care of the usual routines, but I didn't add anything extra. I didn't go out of my way to prepare Daniel's schedule or double-check his documents. When he came downstairs, he looked exactly as he always did, composed, focused, already thinking about his day. He didn't mention the date. He didn't notice anything out of place. I handed him his coffee, and for a brief second, I considered saying something just to see how he would respond. I didn't. He left for work with a quick goodbye, already mid-conversation on his phone. The door closed behind him, and the house settled into stillness again. I stood there, listening to that quiet, and realized I didn't feel hurt in the way I used to. It wasn't sharp or overwhelming. It was steady, clear, like something I had finally accepted instead of resisted. In the afternoon, I went back to the bakery and picked up the cake I had ordered. The woman behind the counter smiled politely as she handed it to me, unaware of how much thought I had put into something so small. I carried it home carefully, placed it in the center of the table, and arranged a simple dinner around it. There were no decorations, no candles, nothing elaborate. I didn't need any of that. I just needed the moment to exist. As evening approached, I changed into a dress I hadn't worn in a long time. It wasn't new, but it was one I had always liked, something simple that made me feel like myself. I looked at my reflection briefly, not searching for anything in particular, just acknowledging the woman standing there. Then I went downstairs and waited. Daniel texted to say he would be late. The message was short, casual, as if it required no further explanation. I read it once, set my phone down, and sat at the table. I didn't feel the urge to call him or ask when he would be home. I didn't feel the need to adjust anything. The food stayed where it was. The cake remained untouched. When he finally walked in, it was later than usual. He looked tired, slightly irritated, his attention still divided between the room and whatever was happening on his phone. He barely glanced at the table before setting his things down. "What's all this?" he asked, not with curiosity, but with a hint of annoyance, as if I had introduced something unnecessary into his evening. "It's dinner," I said simply. He sighed, rubbing his forehead like he had just walked into another problem. "I told you I had a long day," he said. "I'm not really in the mood for this. The words settled in the air between us. I didn't respond right away. I watched him, noticed the way he avoided looking directly at me, the way his phone lit up again in his hand. A message came through, and even from where I stood, I could see the name. Vanessa. He read it quickly, a small shift in his expression that I had learned to recognize over time. Lighter, more engaged, more present than he had been since he walked through the door. He typed a response without hesitation. I followed his movement with my eyes, then looked back at the table. "It's my birthday," I said. The words didn't come out sharply. They were quiet, almost neutral, like I was stating a fact that didn't need emphasis. He paused just for a second, then let out a short breath. "Right," he said. "I forgot." There was no apology in his tone, just acknowledgement, as if that was enough. He glanced at the cake, then really seeing it for the first time. Something about it seemed to irritate him more. "You didn't have to do all this," he said. "I'm already dealing with enough today." I felt something settle inside me, not rising, not breaking, just settling into place. "It's not for you," I said. He looked at me then, a flicker of confusion crossing his face, quickly replaced by irritation. "Then what is it for?" "For me." The silence that followed was brief but sharp. It wasn't a kind of silence we had experienced before. It didn't invite discussion. It didn't soften anything. He shook his head, a small, dismissive movement. "I don't have time for this tonight," he said, reaching for his phone again. "I'm meeting Vanessa. We still have things to go over." That was the moment everything became very simple. I stepped closer to the table, my eyes still on him. "You're leaving?" I asked. He nodded already, turning away. "I'll be back later." And then, without looking at me again, he moved past the table. His hand brushed against the edge of it, careless, impatient. The cake shifted, then fell. It hit the floor with a dull sound, the box opening slightly on impact, the carefully arranged surface collapsing into something unrecognizable. For a second, neither of us moved. He glanced down at it, then back at me, his expression unchanged. "Just clean it up," he said. "Or eat it yourself. I don't care." Then he picked up his keys and walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft click. I stood there, looking at the cake on the floor, at the mess it had become. There was no rush of emotion, no sudden wave of anger or tears, just a clear, steady understanding that settled over everything. I bent down, picked up the box, and carried it to the sink. I cleaned the floor carefully, wiping away every trace, until it looked exactly the way it had before. When I finished, I washed my hands, dried them slowly, and walked upstairs. I didn't hesitate. I took out a suitcase and began packing the things that were mine, only the things that belonged to me, leaving everything else exactly where it was. I moved through each room with the same calm precision I had used for years, but this time, I wasn't maintaining the life inside it. I was stepping out of it. When I came back downstairs, the house looked untouched, as if nothing had happened at all. I picked up my keys, took one last look around, and walked out the door without turning back. I didn't go far that night, just far enough to be somewhere that belonged to me and no one else. I checked into a small hotel on the other side of town, the kind of place that was clean, quiet, and anonymous. I didn't tell anyone where I was. I didn't leave a note. For the first time in years, I allowed my absence to speak for itself. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm out of habit more than anything else. For a few seconds, I felt disoriented, the unfamiliar ceiling above me, reminding me that I wasn't in the house I had spent so many years maintaining. Then the memory of the night before settled in not as a shock, but as a fact. I got up, made myself a cup of coffee in the small machine by the window, and sat down in the quiet. There were messages on my phone, but not many. A missed call from Daniel, followed by a short text asking where I was. No urgency, no apology, just a question. I looked at it, then set the phone aside. I didn't respond. I spent the rest of the morning doing something I hadn't done in a long time. I went through my own files, not his, not anything related to his work, but mine. Notes I had kept, drafts I had written, documents I had reviewed over the years. It was strange seeing it all in one place without immediately thinking about how it connected to Daniel's needs. It reminded me in a quiet but undeniable way that I had always been more than the role I had accepted. Around midday, I received another message, this one longer. Daniel wrote that he had an important meeting that afternoon and needed to confirm a few details. He asked if I had updated a document he couldn't seem to find. The wording was polite, but there was an edge of confusion beneath it, as if something small had gone missing and he didn't quite understand why. I read the message carefully. The document he was referring to was one I usually finalized the night before any major meeting. I checked my files. I hadn't touched it. I set the phone down again and didn't reply. Hours passed, and the messages grew more frequent. First, a request for clarification. Then another asking if I had moved anything in his office. Then a short message that simply read, "Call me." I could almost see the progression of his thoughts, the way irritation would have slowly turned into something closer to unease. I didn't need to imagine what was happening on his end. I knew his patterns too well. He would open his laptop expecting everything to be in place, only to realize that something was missing. He would check his usual folders, then the backup locations, growing more impatient with each passing minute. Eventually, he would start blaming the system, the files, anyone but himself. And then at some point, he would notice the one difference that mattered. I wasn't there. Later that afternoon, my phone rang again, this time with his name lighting up the screen. I let it ring once, twice, then go to voicemail. A few seconds later, a message came through, his voice sharper now, asking where I had gone, what I had done with his files, why things weren't where they were supposed to be. I listened to it once, then deleted it. I wasn't angry. That was the part that surprised me the most. There was no satisfaction in hearing the strain in his voice, no sense of victory. There was only clarity. For years, I had stepped in before things reached this point. I had anticipated problems before they could take shape, smoothing them out so completely that they never even registered as problems to him. Now, without that intervention, everything unfolded exactly as it should have all along. By the evening, another message came in, shorter this time. "The meeting didn't go well," he wrote. "Call me." I didn't. Instead, I stepped out of the hotel and walked for a while, letting the cool air settle my thoughts. I passed by offices, restaurants, people moving through their own routines, and I realized how little any of it had to do with the life I had been living. For so long, my world had been structured around maintaining someone else's momentum. Without that responsibility, everything felt strangely open. When I returned to the hotel, there was another message waiting. This one was different. "They're asking questions," Daniel wrote, "about the numbers." I read it slowly. That was the detail he should have been most careful about. The numbers were always where the smallest inconsistencies could create the largest problems. I had learned that early on after that presentation years ago when I caught something that could have cost him everything. Since then, I had made it a habit to review every figure, every projection, every line that could be questioned. This time, I hadn't. And now those questions were surfacing exactly where they should have. I sat down on the edge of the bed, holding the phone in my hand, and let the moment settle. There was no need to guess what would come next. a request for help framed as urgency, a reminder of everything we had built together, an expectation that I would step back into place and fix what had gone wrong. The message came a few minutes later, just as I expected. "I need you to look at this," he wrote. "It's important." I stared at the screen for a long moment before setting it down beside me. The words felt familiar, not because they were new, but because they were part of a pattern I had lived inside for years. The difference now was that I was no longer standing inside it. For the first time, nothing was being corrected, nothing was being adjusted, nothing was being quietly repaired before anyone else could notice. Things weren't falling apart because something had changed. They were simply revealing what had always been there. Things weren't falling apart because something had changed. They were unfolding because nothing was being held together anymore, and for the first time, Daniel had to face what that really meant. The messages didn't stop after that. They shifted. The tone changed from irritation to urgency, from expectation to something closer to pressure. He stopped asking where I was and started focusing on what he needed. He sent screenshots of documents, highlighted sections, short explanations that made less and less sense the more I read them. It was clear he was trying to piece things together quickly, reacting instead of understanding. By the next morning, there was a call from a number I recognized but didn't expect. Marcus Bell. I let it ring once, then answered. "Evelyn," he said, his voice calm but direct. "I wasn't sure if I should reach out, but something seems off." I let him continue. "Daniel presented yesterday," he said. The structure was there, but the detail wasn't. There were gaps. Not small ones. "I see," I said. There was a brief pause, not awkward, just measured. "You've always been thorough," he added. "I assume you know what I'm referring to." I did, and I also understood what he wasn't saying. "I haven't been involved," I told him. Another pause, slightly longer this time. "That explains it," he said quietly. There was no accusation in his tone, no surprise, just confirmation. As if something he had suspected had finally been clarified. "Will you be stepping back in?" he asked. The question was simple, but it carried weight, not just for the project, but for everything surrounding it. "No," I said. He didn't argue. He didn't try to persuade me. "Then I'll adjust accordingly," he replied. "Thank you for being honest." We ended the call there. It was brief, but it settled something in a way I hadn't expected. For years I had operated in the background, aware of how much I contributed, but never hearing it acknowledged directly by someone outside the situation. Now, in a few quiet sentences, that reality had been spoken out loud. An hour later, Daniel called again. This time, I answered. "Where are you?" he asked immediately, his voice tight, controlled, but strained underneath. "I'm fine," I said. "That's not what I asked," he replied. "I need to know where you are." "For what?" There was a slight pause, just enough to reveal that he hadn't expected the question. "Because we need to talk," he said. "There are things you need to fix." I let that sit between us for a moment. "What exactly do you think I need to fix?" I asked. "You know what I mean," he said quickly. "The proposal, the numbers, the follow-up documents. They're asking questions I shouldn't have to answer like this. I don't have time to go through everything from scratch." From scratch! I almost repeated the words back to him, but I didn't. Instead, I listened to the way he framed the situation, how naturally he placed the responsibility back where it had always been. "You've handled this before," he continued. "Just take a look and clean it up. It won't take you long." There was no acknowledgement of the past few days, no mention of what had happened, no recognition of why I had left. Just a direct line from his problem to my expected solution. "I'm not there anymore," I said. I know that he replied, impatience slipping through. "That's why I'm calling you. I need you to step in." The words were familiar. The tone was familiar. The entire exchange felt like something I had lived through dozens of times, just with a different level of urgency. "I'm not stepping in," I said. Silence followed, heavier this time. "What do you mean?" he asked. "I mean you'll have to handle it yourself." The shift on the other end of the line was immediate. Not just surprise, but something sharper, something that bordered on disbelief. "That's not funny," he said. "I'm not joking. You can't just walk away from this," he continued, his voice rising slightly. I considered it for a moment, not because I agreed with it, but because I understood why he used it. It was easier to believe in a shared foundation than to accept how uneven it had always been. "No," I said calmly. "You built your career. I supported it. There's a difference." He let out a breath, frustrated now. "This isn't the time for that conversation. I have people waiting on answers." "Then you should give them answers," I replied. Another pause, longer, filled with something I hadn't heard from him before. Not just anger, but uncertainty. "You're serious," he said. "Yes. You're really not going to help." I didn't respond right away. I thought about the years behind us, about every time I had stepped in without being asked. Every time I had corrected something before it could become a problem. Every time I had made his life run smoothly without ever expecting anything in return. Then I answered, "No," I said, "I'm not." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of realization, not complete, but enough to change the way he spoke next. "You're making a mistake," he said, quieter now. "No," I replied. "I'm correcting one." He didn't argue after that. The call ended shortly after, not with resolution, but with something else, something that felt like the beginning of understanding. I set my phone down and sat there for a while, letting the quiet settle around me again. It wasn't the same kind of quiet as before. It didn't carry uncertainty or hesitation. It felt steady, grounded. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for something to go wrong so I could fix it. I was letting things unfold exactly as they were. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for something to go wrong so I could fix it. I was watching what happened when nothing was fixed at all. The shift didn't happen all at once. It rarely does. It started quietly with small signs that most people would overlook if they weren't paying attention. A delayed response here, a missed follow-up there, the kind of things that on their own don't seem significant. But when they begin to stack, they change how people see you. Over the next few days, I heard from Marcus again, not directly about Daniel, but about adjustments that needed to be made moving forward. His tone remained steady professional, but there was a clarity in it now. He wasn't trying to recover something that had already begun to slip. He was recalibrating, moving on. I understood what that meant without needing him to say it. Daniel's messages became less frequent after our last conversation. But when they did come, they were different. Shorter, more controlled, as if he was choosing his words carefully, trying to maintain some sense of authority, even as things shifted around him. He mentioned follow-up meetings, new proposals, alternative strategies. He didn't ask for help again, not directly. But the absence of those requests didn't mean things were improving. It meant he was trying to manage without me. I imagined him sitting at his desk, going through documents that no longer aligned the way they used to. I could see him rereading emails, trying to trace back where something had gone off track, looking for a pattern he had never needed to understand before. That was the part he couldn't replace quickly. Not the tasks themselves, but the instinct behind them. A few days later, I received a message from someone I hadn't heard from in a long time, one of Daniel's former clients. The message was brief, polite, asking if I was still involved in any capacity. It wasn't framed as concern, but it carried the weight of it. I responded simply, "No, I'm not." There was a short pause before the reply came back. "I thought so," he wrote. "Things feel different." I didn't ask for clarification. I didn't need it. By the end of the week, the pattern was clear. It wasn't just one project. It wasn't just one contract. The confidence people had in Daniel wasn't disappearing overnight, but it was changing. It was becoming cautious, measured less certain. And in his world, that was enough to shift everything. Vanessa, from what I could tell, adjusted quickly. Her messages stopped appearing on Daniel's phone the way they used to. There were no more late-night calls, no more visible signs of her presence in his day-to-day life. She had aligned herself with him when he appeared strong, when his position offered something stable to stand beside. Now that stability was no longer guaranteed. People like her didn't stay where things were uncertain. I didn't feel anything about that. Not satisfaction, not resentment, just recognition. A few days later, my mother called again. This time, her tone was different. There was less assumption in it, more curiosity. "I heard you left," she said without preamble. "Yes," I replied. There was a pause, the kind that usually came before a lecture or a reminder of responsibility. Instead, she said, "You know how these things look." I let that settle for a moment. "I do," I said. "And you're still not going back?" "No." Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear her trying to find the right angle, the right way to bring the conversation back into familiar territory. "You've always been the one who keeps things together," she said finally. "You can handle this better than anyone." The words were the same as they had always been. The meaning hadn't changed either. It was still an expectation, still a quiet way of telling me that my role was to absorb the impact, to smooth things over, so that everything could return to normal. "I'm not going to," I said. She didn't argue. She didn't agree either. The call ended shortly after, not with resolution, but with a kind of distance that hadn't existed before. That evening, I met Claire for dinner. We had known each other for years, though life had taken us in different directions over time. She had always been more direct than I was, less willing to accept things as they were if they didn't make sense. She listened as I explained what had happened, not interrupting, not offering immediate advice. When I finished, she leaned back slightly, studying me. "You're not angry," she said. "No," I replied. "You should be," she added, not as a criticism but as an observation. "I was," I said, "a long time ago." She nodded as if that made sense. "So what is this then?" I thought about it for a moment before answering. "It's clarity," I said. She didn't question it. She didn't try to redefine it. She just accepted the word and what it represented. "You know he's not going to land on his feet the way he thinks he will," she said after a moment. "I know," I replied. "And you're okay with that?" I considered the question carefully. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to be certain of it. "I didn't cause it," I said. "I just stopped preventing it." She held my gaze for a moment longer, then gave a small nod. "That's a different kind of strength," she said. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. When I returned to the hotel later that night, my phone was quiet. No new messages, no missed calls. For the first time since I had left, there was no immediate reminder of what was happening on the other side of that distance. I sat by the window for a while, looking out at the city lights, thinking about everything that had shifted in such a short amount of time. Nothing about it felt rushed or chaotic. It felt inevitable. I hadn't taken anything from him. I hadn't interfered. I hadn't exposed anything that wasn't already there. I had simply stepped back, and now everything was moving exactly as it would have if I had never been there to hold it together in the first place. I had simply stepped back, and everything was moving exactly as it would have without me. That understanding stayed with me in the days that followed, steady and unchanged, even as the situation on Daniel's side became more difficult to ignore. He didn't contact me for several days after our last conversation. The silence wasn't peaceful, but it was different from before. It didn't feel like avoidance. It felt like something was shifting, like he was trying to manage what was happening without reaching for the solution he had always relied on. When his name finally appeared on my phone again, it was early in the evening. I looked at it for a moment before answering, not out of hesitation, but because I already knew the tone I would hear. "Evelyn," he said, his voice quieter than I remembered, less controlled, as if he had been holding something back for too long. "Yes," I replied. There was a brief pause, and then he exhaled slowly. "We need to talk." "We are talking," I said. He didn't respond to that right away. I could hear movement on his end, a chair shifting papers, rustling the faint background noise of a space that no longer felt stable. "I've been trying to handle things," he said finally. "But it's not working." I listened without interrupting. "They're pulling back," he continued. "Not just one deal, several. People are asking questions I don't have answers for. things I didn't even realize were issues before. There it was not an admission of fault, but an acknowledgement of reality. He wasn't pretending everything was under control anymore. I see, I said. Another pause followed longer this time, as if he was deciding how much he was willing to say. I need you to look at something, he said, the words more measured now. Just one thing. There's a meeting coming up, and if I can get ahead of it, I might be able to turn this around. The phrasing had changed. There was less assumption, more negotiation. But the core of it was still the same. You've already said that, I replied. I know, he said quickly. And I know what you said before. But this is different. This isn't about everything. Just this one situation. I leaned back slightly, holding the phone to my ear, listening to the way he tried to narrow the request, to make it manageable, temporary, reasonable. If I fix this one thing I said, what happens next? I'll take it from there, he answered. Like you did this time, the question landed exactly where it needed to. He didn't respond immediately. That's not fair, he said after a moment. No, I said. It's accurate. The silence that followed wasn't tense. It was clear. For the first time, we weren't talking past each other. We were looking at the same thing from opposite sides. I'm not asking you to come back, he said, his voice lower now. I just need your help. I let that settle before answering. You don't need my help, I said. You need what my help used to prevent. He didn't argue with that. He couldn't. I didn't realize how much you were doing, he said after a moment. I closed my eyes briefly, not out of emotion, but to steady the thought that came with those words. It wasn't new. It wasn't even surprising. It was simply late. That's the problem, I replied. You didn't realize. I do now, he said. I didn't question whether he meant it. I didn't need to. Realization when it comes this late doesn't undo anything. It just explains it. So help me fix it, he continued. Just this once. I thought about the years behind us, about every time I had stepped in quietly, about how natural it had felt to do it, and how invisible it had become because of that. I thought about the moment in the kitchen, the sound of the cake hitting the floor, the way he had looked at me as if none of it mattered. Then I opened my eyes and spoke. Handle it yourself. The words came out exactly as they had been said to me, calm and steady, without emphasis. On the other end of the line, there was no immediate response, just silence followed by a slow intake of breath. You're serious, he said. Yes, you're really going to let this fall apart. I considered that carefully. I'm not letting anything happen, I said. I'm just not stopping it. That's the same thing, he replied, frustration creeping back into his voice. No, I said. It's not. He exhaled again, sharper this time. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I didn't respond to that. There was nothing to add. Evelyn, he said, and this time there was something different in his tone. Not control, not frustration, but something closer to uncertainty. I need you. There it was. Not a request for help, not a negotiation, a statement. I listened to the way the words sounded when he said them and understood exactly what they meant. You need what I did for you, I said. That's not the same as needing me. He didn't answer. The silence stretched long enough that I could tell he was thinking, not searching for a quick response, but actually considering what I had said. I can change that, he said eventually. I shook my head slightly, even though he couldn't see it. You can't change what you didn't value when you had it, I replied. That's not true, he said more quietly now. It is, I said. Because if it mattered, you would have noticed before it was gone. He didn't argue again. There was nothing left to argue. The call ended not with anger, not with resolution, but with a kind of understanding that had never existed between us before. It wasn't mutual, not completely, but it was enough. I set my phone down and sat there for a while, letting the silence return. This time, it didn't feel like something waiting to be filled. It felt complete. It felt complete, and that was something I had never experienced before, without immediately questioning it. I didn't feel the need to revisit the conversation, to replay it in my mind, or to wonder if I should have said something differently. For once, there was no second guessing, no quiet urge to adjust my own words to make someone else more comfortable. I had said exactly what I meant, and that was enough. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that belonged entirely to me. It wasn't dramatic or transformative in the way people sometimes expect when a life changes direction. It was simpler than that. I woke up without anticipating someone else's schedule. I made decisions without considering how they would affect anyone's perception of me. The absence of those constant calculations created a kind of space I hadn't realized I was missing. I moved out of the hotel after a week and found a small apartment not far from where I had been staying. It wasn't large, but it was well lit, quiet, and entirely mine. There was something grounding about arranging a space without thinking about how it would be used by someone else, or whether it would meet expectations that were never spoken, but always present. Every decision, from where to place a chair to what to keep within reach, felt intentional in a way that didn't require explanation. Work in its own form found its way back into my life as well. Not in the same structure as before, not tied to Daniel's name or his reputation, but connected to what I had always been capable of on my own. Marcus reached out again, this time with a different kind of conversation. He didn't mention Daniel. He didn't refer to what had happened. Instead, he spoke about a project that required someone who could anticipate problems before they surfaced, someone who understood how to hold complex situations together without drawing attention to the effort involved. "I thought of you," he said simply. "I accepted not because I needed to prove anything, but because it felt right." The work was familiar in its nature, but different in its context. For the first time, the value I brought was acknowledged openly, not assumed, not hidden behind someone else's name. It wasn't overwhelming or dramatic. It was steady, consistent, and clear. There were occasional updates about Daniel, though I didn't seek them out. People talk, especially when something shifts in a way that others can see. I heard that he was still trying to rebuild, still reaching out, still attempting to regain the ground he had lost. Some connections held, others didn't. The details didn't matter as much as the pattern. Without the structure that had once supported him, everything required more effort than he was used to giving. Weeks passed before I heard from him again. This time it wasn't a call. It was a message, brief and direct. "Can we meet?" I read it once and set the phone down. I didn't feel the urgency that might have once accompanied a request like that. I thought about it for a while, not because I felt obligated, but because I wanted to be certain of my own reasons. I agreed. We met in a quiet cafe in the middle of the afternoon. It was a neutral space, one that didn't carry any of the weight of our shared past. When I walked in, he was already there, seated near the window. He looked different, not in a way that could be defined easily, but in the way people do when something fundamental has shifted. He stood when he saw me, a small, automatic gesture that felt almost unfamiliar coming from him. We sat down across from each other, and for a moment neither of us spoke. "I didn't expect you to say yes," he said finally. "I didn't expect you to ask," I replied. He nodded slightly, accepting that without argument. "I've been thinking about everything he said. About what you said. About what I didn't see." I listened, not interrupting. "I thought I understood how things worked," he continued. "I thought I had control over everything I was building. I didn't realize how much of that depended on you." There was no defensiveness in his tone this time, no attempt to shift responsibility, just a straightforward acknowledgement. "I can see that now," I said. He hesitated, then leaned forward slightly. "I know I can't go back and change what happened," he said. "But I want to try to make things right." I held his gaze for a moment, considering the words carefully. "What does that mean to you?" I asked. It means I know I was wrong," he said. "It means I understand what I lost." I nodded once slowly. "You lost the version of your life that worked for you," I said. "That's not the same as understanding me." He sat back, absorbing that. There was no immediate response, no attempt to correct me, just a quiet acceptance that the conversation wasn't going where he might have hoped. "I need you," he said after a moment, the words softer, now less certain. I recognized the statement for what it was, not a declaration of feeling, but a reflection of absence. I didn't respond right away. I let the silence sit between us, not uncomfortable, just honest. "You need what I used to do for you," I said finally. "That's not something I'm going to be again." He looked down at the table, then back at me. "There's nothing I can say to change that." "No," I said, "because this isn't about what you say. It's about what you understood when it mattered." He didn't argue. He didn't try to persuade me further. The conversation settled into a quiet conclusion, not dramatic, not final in the way people expect, but complete in its own way. When we stood to leave, there was no tension, no unfinished question hanging in the air, just a clear understanding of where things stood. I walked out of the cafe and into the afternoon light, not looking back, not wondering if I should have stayed longer or said more. The past remained where it belonged, not erased, not rewritten, but no longer something I needed to carry forward. I hadn't taken anything from him. I hadn't forced anything to collapse. I had simply stepped away from a life that depended on me in ways it never acknowledged. And in doing that, I finally allowed myself to live one that did. If there's one thing this story reminds us, it's that being quiet does not mean being weak, and being patient does not mean you deserve to be taken for granted. Evelyn didn't win by fighting louder or hurting someone back. She won the moment she stopped carrying what was never hers to carry alone. Too often we stay in places where we are only valued for what we provide, not for who we are. And we convince ourselves that loyalty means endurance. But real respect is not built on silent sacrifice. It is built on awareness, appreciation, and mutual effort. The lesson here is simple but powerful. If someone only realizes your value after you are gone, they never truly valued you in the first place. So what should you do? Pay attention to how people treat you when you are giving your best, not when you finally pull away. And what should you not do? Do not keep proving your worth to people who have already decided not to see it. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is not to fix what is broken, but to step back and let the truth reveal itself.